Welcome to Book Date with a CBS 8 book club where we showcase books set in San Diego or by San Diego authors. For our fourth book club pick, our team chose Desperation Reef by T. Jefferson Parker. The book is mainly set in Laguna Beach and follows a big wave surfer and her sons as they compete in the same contest that killed her husband many years before. Joining us in studio for Book Date with A is San Diego resident and New York Times bestselling author T. Jefferson Parker. Good morning to you. Thanks for being with us.
Nice to be here.
We are stoked to have this as our latest pick.
Stoked, that's
this
a good way.
I know, right? Exactly, fitting.
It's about surfing.
We haven't had a pick so far that is focused on the surf community in San Diego, and that is a central part of this book is, of course, the contest that takes place, but it also kind of ties in some crime along the way. So for readers at home who haven't picked up the book yet, give them kind of a general idea of what to expect in Desperation Reef.
Yeah, your synopsis was perfect. You know, a family of big wave surfers competing professionally, about to enter a contest in which Jen, the matriarch's husband, father of her twins, was killed 24 years ago. That contest being the monsters of Mavericks, up south of San Francisco, and Half Moon Bay, you know, which is one of the big wave surfing hotspots, one of the few in the world.
It is set largely in Orange County and San Diego County. There are a ton of references to National City and Oceanside and all spots that San Diego residents know. Was this something that was easy for you to come up with because you knew all those settings, or was there a ton of additional research that you had to do in finding how to place those spots?
Well, you know, a little bit of both. I live in San Diego County, you know, North County,
Fallbrook, right?
So I get out, you know, and I love San Diego County. So I'm always down at the beaches looking for sea glass, or, you know, walking the dog or whatever, you know. And interestingly, one of the premier big wave breaks in the world is 90 miles off the coast. You know, it's one of the spectacular breaks. It's Cortez Bank. Not many people know about it because it only breaks very occasionally. But when it breaks, it's giant and it's perfect and it's scary.
That's what I feel like a lot of people mention in this book is if you're not a surfer, you don't have to be a surfer or know the idea of, you know, towing out a surfer. You kind of dive into everything you need to know in the book, right?
I try to. You know, I'm really fascinated by surfing in general. You know, I did a lot of body surfing and some kneeboarding when I was a kid. I was never much of a surfer, but I've been around waves a lot and enough to know how powerful they are and how scary they can be. And I'm just real intrigued by these enormous waves that you know, 30 years ago, in the heyday of surfing, people weren't even riding because they were too big and too fast, and now they're doing it.
We have so many other books by you, and you're working on another one right now. So first off, remind viewers at home, how many books have you written so far?
Well, this is my 29th.
29th book, so you're working on number 30, right?
I'm finishing up 30.
What can people expect from that one? I know you can't tell us a lot, but what can you tell us?
No top secrets, but the 30th book is called Wild Instinct, and it's designed to be kind of a classic Southern California whodunit.
Are a lot of your books crime focused? Okay,
pretty much.
So there we go.
Some more than others. You know, I've written a few, but yeah, there's crime runs through all of my books. I'm interested in crime, and I like reading the papers and looking at the news and just kind of hearing all the things that are going on.
And that's covered in this. The local news is covered in this. I mean, you kind of get all angles of crime that happens in this book as well. Viewers at home can grab their copy of Desperation Reef as well. We are going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll sit down with a panel of readers to talk more about Desperation Reef. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone. We are about to get all of your questions and our questions answered. We are joined by Julie Slavinsky, Director of Events at Warwick's in La Jolla, as well as Book Date with A producer, Cameron Duncan. Welcome you two again.
Thank you.
Good to be back.
All three of us read Desperation Reef. We all have our own questions. And we all kind of look at each other's questions to see what angle we're going at. And Cameron's first question, I feel like, is a nice way of kind of starting it off the discussion. So I'll let you start.
So obviously there's a lot that goes into this book. There's a huge crime element, you know, it's the surfing competition, but it really reads like a love letter to surfing and the ocean. When describing the water, the characters often have a sense of respect, fear, reverence, Can you talk more about this and how your relationship with the ocean shaped the book?
Good observation. It is a love letter. It definitely is. And it's a love letter to Laguna Beach and to North San Diego County. Wherever I live, I write about. And there's an underlying tone of love letterness in all of my books, depending on where they're set, which depends on where I live. But yeah, you know, my relationship goes way, way back. Born in LA, grew up in Orange County, down at the beach because of Mom all the time. She had this great big surf mattress, one of those inflatable things that are really hard, not the mushy ones, the real hard ones, you know. And she would go out in those waves at Huntington Beach, and we would go with her. And so I grew up doing stuff like that, you know, and later, you know, body surfing a ton, riding a kneeboard, a little bit of surfing. Newport Beach mostly, you know, was sort of my beat. I grew up in Tustin, and Newport was the closest good break for that kind of stuff. And so yeah, immense respect for the ocean and all the things in it. I'm a fisherman. I've done a fair amount of ocean fishing, which is in the book. I really like it. It's you know, the ocean is the book kind of is about fear in a lot of ways, fear of the known. And in this case, it's Jen, the matriarch, the big wave surfer, who's going to enter a contest that killed her husband 20 years ago. And she needs to conquer those big waves again to have her self-respect back and assuage her guilt for her husband's demise, which some people blame on her. So anyway, the ocean is a scary place, and I know that from being in it, and it's a gorgeous and peaceful place too, and is full of surprises and power. And if you want to write a book about being scared, write about a big wave surfer.
Yeah, right.
Well, the big wave surfing is a part of it, but the ocean is a scary place too, and knowing and your respect for the ocean. So you reference also in the book, and you also acknowledge Susan Casey, who wrote The Wave.
Yep.
And she also has a new book out, The Underworld, which is amazing. So 2 questions about that. Did you find her insight into that helpful in writing the book? And was Casey an homage? The name Casey an homage to her, or no?
Well, no, it wasn't. I picked it because I liked it as a name for him, and I thought it was a good name. But as you said, I mentioned Susan Casey twice in the book. I think once character says something about her, and once I just thank her in the credits. So yeah, I'm such a fan, and I've read most of what she's written, and she's terrific. You know?
But there's respect for the ocean, which I think you have as well. Is that this, you know, what it means and what these big waves mean to, but also what it means in a greater, the shark fins, you know, just that whole respect for the whole global part of the ocean.
Yeah, it's such a wild and immense place, and it's, especially as seen through the waves and the swells and the changing world, it's changing. You know, the waves are actually getting bigger. You know, and the swells are getting more powerful, and you know, it's getting hotter. The climate's changing due to the ocean warming. So this giant, massive, mysterious ocean is in flux. You know, it's powerful, and you just have to be kind of in awe of it.
Right.
I am.
I was curious. I wanted to kind of dive into a specific portion of it because I got the copy of the book. I thought this whole thing was going to be about a surf competition, but the actual competition itself is only, what, 40 or so pages of the book? It's a smaller portion of it. So when you started writing, did you already have, was the first thing you wrote the competition, or at what point in the writing process did you write the actual competition?
Yeah, you know, I wrote it last because it comes last, if you will, almost last, and I did have the good fortune to have stubbed my toe on that idea before I started writing the book. I sensed that the big competition, the Monsters of Mavericks, I call it, would be the final action piece, if you will. So I was going that way from the beginning. I didn't have to think about the plotting too much. I knew that was going to be where everything comes together.
So you expected the crime to kind of center around the first 200 or so pages, and then to dive into it. Did you already have the idea of what was going to happen at the competition?
No. As a matter of fact, I changed it. You know?
Interesting.
When I turned in the first draft, who wins and loses the competition and who gets hurt or who doesn't were different.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Super interesting.
Did Casey not win in the original one? Can you tell us?
They both win.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Casey has a twin brother, and they're both in the
Yes.
contest, and they're very different guys,
Yes.
and they're ferociously competitive and just kind of don't like each other a lot of the time, but they love each other. So in the original draft of this book, they both won. They become tied for first on the points and everything. But my editor said, nah, we want somebody, we want a winner and a
Yeah.
loser here.
Well, and it does feel like Casey is kind of, we were talking about this before, how Casey seems to kind of be the main character, even though they're all three the main
Yeah.
character.
He kind of is, yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting because throughout the book, Casey, when asked, says he wants Brock to
win.
win. So I was interested to see who actually wins. And off of that, their relationship as brothers is really interesting. They kind of function as like a dichotomy to one another. Like they're two opposites of the same spectrum. They're the opposite aspects of their dad, even. There's one point where Brock describes himself as like the actor and Casey's a reactor and all that. Can you talk more about the differences about them and why that was significant for the plot of the book?
Yeah, sure. You know, I've always been, I've written a lot of brother stories. I think this is the first twins brother story that I've written, but I write about brothers all the time. I have a brother my age, and we grew real close together, not twins, but so I love brother stories, and I love, to me, some of the essential brother stories are the ones from the Old Testament where where Cain, you know, slays Abel, and this incredible competition and difference, you know. And I thought, how could you be more penetrating with that idea than make the boys twins? Well, they're only born like minutes apart, you know, and here they're 26 years old, 21 years old now for the big contest, and they're professional big wave surfers, and they're very different. You know, Casey is physically kind of imposing, and he's blonde, and he's muscled, and he's very real handsome. He models stuff for, you know, swimsuits for extra money. And then Brock is tall and kind of rangy and dark, and he's got his hair, you know, kind of locked out, and he's tattooed all over the place, and he's always, you know, berating Casey for being a vain striver and a model and stuff. And Brock has his own church that he's created, which is full of kind of not fire and brimstone, but it's full of action. Brock believes that the mankind's purpose under God, which he does not call God. He won't call it God. There is no God as far as Brock's church is concerned. There's the breath of life. That's God. And his job is to go help people in the world who are in trouble. So he takes his people, his congregation, the Go Dogs, they call themselves, and he travels from disaster to disaster in the United States trying to help people. Floods, hurricanes, wildfires, patrolling downtown San Diego, trying to help the homeless with their fentanyl problems and all. And he's a rescue guy, but he's profane and he's violent and he's just a really strange minister.
Yeah.
So and Casey's the opposite. He believes in God and he's God-fearing and he prays and he wants his brother to win the contest and they're just so different. So I had a blast doing that. You know, it was no trouble. If you made them too much alike, it wouldn't go anywhere.
Well, helping off the twins thing, because you mentioned that it's, you know, you've written brothers, you decided to do twins this time. Do you do that because these are the thoughts that it's hard to put those thoughts into one person, so you kind of have to, so are those the way of you personally getting into that?
Yeah, you really do, you know, because you can't combine all that. You know, Brock and Casey, for example, they just don't mix, you know, and they're so different.
But they have really good thoughts about those two things. You just can't put that typically into one person.
Yeah, you can't hold them both at the same time and believe them. So and I like that. It gives me a chance to spin out of myself and give, you know, make flesh another person who doesn't believe or behave like I do at all.
Right.
And that's fun. That's one of the blessings of being a writer, is you get to go there.
And so I feel like so many of their conversations and the conversations among those religious and political groups are kind of, like you said, I mean, these are real thoughts that people have. They are very, you know, convicted in their beliefs one way or another. And it's an interesting way of, I guess, hearing from another perspective, but it also is kind of controversial in the way that they speak about their beliefs. You know, when you tie in Brock's opposing group that he's up against in so many of these battles, so to speak. I wanted to also bring in Betty, who I feel like is I would argue, the most contentious character, or maybe the most controversial character in the book. I started off hating Betty. I'm not gonna lie, it took a lot in me to even slightly come around to her. Were you worried about, in writing her, making her too unlikable? Or did you feel like it was a safe ground to say that everything that was done was in the name of her family and not her?
Yeah, good question. She's certainly controversial, and she is despicable when you meet her, you know, for sure, in a really sexy, interesting way, you know. And she's leading this, or she's part of this band of pirates, living on their ships off coast, living in this big slip in San Diego, taking the mothership out, and they're poaching fish like crazy, and they're finning sharks, and they're selling these animals, you know, illegally. And so she is despicable, but she has her standards, and she's not one of the ones who does the finning exactly. She's armed, but she doesn't shoot anybody.
Right.
And she has this really interesting background, you know, as a UCLA student and co-ed, and you wanted to be a filmmaker and all this stuff. And a lot of her character develops and changes during the course of the book, which is what a novel can do so beautifully, I think, when it's done right, is you see a character begin at A and end at Z, and they've changed, you know.
That's what and that was like the hardest part for me, was accepting that the changes that she was making were changes that she genuinely wanted to make, as opposed to her being even more conniving along the way.
I
So
kept thinking she was conniving. She was like, "There's got to be something."
that's
like,
every
no,
time.
yeah.
Every time I was like, "There's got to be a
There's
reason why
serious.
she's doing this, right?"
Well, our hearts all hurt for May when she was kidnapped.
Yeah.
I know. Well, we were talking about the dogs, you know, and Jeff. So that brings up May as a great segue into the dog. Dogs have become a little more and more important in some of your books. You actually wrote Rescue, right? Rescue.
Yeah, the rescue's about a dog.
About a dog. So there were times with May where I was like, "Oh, Jeff, you're not going to go there."
No,
are you?"
literally. Send.
When they threatened to throw her
I was like, "Don't you dare!"
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about the importance of dogs in your life now and the book.
Yeah, I'm a dog boy. Always have been. Dog man. I mean, we always had dogs, and I've had dogs my whole life, and love them. And you know, 3, 4, 5 years ago, I had the idea. You know, I want to write a dog book. I want to see if I can write a thriller with a dog in it and have the dog be sort of one of the main characters, you know, without trying to put words into its mouth.
Right.
And that whole question is tough to solve for a writer's point of view. It's like, how do you give the dog a voice when they don't speak, you know? But so anyway, I did. I wrote The Rescue, which is a thriller with a dog in it. And then in Desperation Reef, I just had to write another dog. I just, you know, had so much fun doing that. And
He really adds to it.
May,
Yeah.
she does add, and she's so Casey, you know, the big blonde, you know, holier than that, not holier than thou, but the nature-loving, God-loving Casey. And May's kind of like that. She's very trusting. She'll do anything for a dog biscuit.
yeah.
She's a Labrador, and
She's
I
running
have
up
labs
to,
my whole life, and they're like that.
During the midst of like the most, you know, contentious arguments, she's running up to greet the other person.
Guns are drawn, and
right.
she's got her tail wagging, and she wants a treat, you know. And so anyway, very different than other dogs that I've written. But thank you. I'm writing another book, as I mentioned to Evan, and got a dog in it.
Ooh, okay. There we go.
But you did have us there. You did have me there for a minute where it's like, "Oh, Jeff, are you going to go there?"
That's what my editor told me when I first decided to write The Rescue. I said, Kristen, I want to write. Do you think the world needs another dog book? You know, because they were really popular, and like. She edited some of the big dog books. She's the dog book maven. I didn't even know that. But she was my new editor, and she said, yes, Jeff, the world needs another dog book. And the first thing she said though was, don't hurt the dog.
Yeah.
That was rule 1.
People can't get past that.
Right, no.
They won't. They can't. And I didn't. So yeah.
I want to bring up some of the realizations or bombs we learn through the end of the book. You know, we learn of John's betrayal. He cheated on Jen with Belle, no less, which was a second realization. We think it's this made-up character that Jen writes in her article series, and we learned it's her best friend. And, you know, as a reader, I almost felt heartbroken. Like, throughout the book where he's this larger-than-life man, like an idol almost, and then to learn what he did and how it kind of, in a way, you know, then it leads to Jen hesitating to save him. Can you just talk a little bit about why you decide that affair would happen and what it means for Jen in the book?
I just kind of, I don't know. They're young Jen and John as they get to know each other as kids and later get married and everything. They're just kind of the perfect couple, and they're happy, and they're talented, and they're real brazen and ambitious about what they want to do and how they want to live and how they want to be. And I thought it was important to just introduce original sin and let it just be, because these things happen. And the way that what he does to her, if you will, affects her ability to functionally save him, and in a moment when she might have been able to, haunts her, to say the least. That's the underlying ghost that haunts the whole story. It's on every page that she's on. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think she was talking about how Casey and Brock reacted, and one of them said, or she said, it made us more real in their eyes. And I think that kind of functions similarly for the viewers, because before that, like you said, their relationship is just so built upon, it's like storybook, and that's not how relationships are. So it was interesting that, real things happen to real people.
Good.
And how it
Yeah,
affects them.
that's what I was hoping for, and that's what she writes about. She's a columnist for the Surf Tribe magazine. And she's writing this story about what happened and what she went through, and she finally, at the end of the story and the contest and everything, she can admit publicly. She confesses to what happened and how it affected them.
But she's a little bit better of a person than me, because she forgave Belle.
Right. Well, and she
So
keeps
that you
Belle in her
gave me-
life the whole time.
And the whole time, which that to me was just like, so did you know you were going to do that? That you were going to reconcile or keep them as a relationship, Belle and Jen?
I thought so. Yeah.
That's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a tough one, and Belle is certifiably insane, and truly pathetically insane, and I know people like that, and Jen she can't execute Belle in any way.
Right.
No.
Well, and that we were talking about how, rightfully so, being the mistress of a married man who dies would make someone go insane, right? Like, was that the idea of having her character develop, Belle's character development, in that she's grappling with her own demons following his death?
Absolutely, and Belle starts out before in life. Belle is already challenged. She's got a rough family life going. I don't go into it, but it's hinted at. She's very, very prone to thrill seeking and drug taking and alcohol from an early age. And so by the time she goes through what she goes through with John, has that affair, she's kind of a loose cannon at that point. And then when he dies, she internalizes that guilt. Somehow betrayed her friend and helped kill her friend's husband, her lover. And so she's just ripe pickings for tragedy and madness, and she descends into it, and yet she still has great affection for Jen, and Jen feels the same way. So yeah, I'm not so sure I would have asked Belle to come stay with me if you ever need a home. She's completely homeless. Right?
Yeah.
She lives on the
Right.
beach,
Yeah.
And so yeah.
Gosh, Jen's a better person than me.
It gave me almost like an Ocean Beach character mentality. I was like, I can picture her hanging
much.
out,
Very much.
downtown there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Very much.
Are we going to get into the crime? You're a crime writer. I mean, so ultimately, this is a book that's centered in crime. That's centered in. So, just for a personal thing, we can get into the specifics of the shark. But do you? Because I felt almost like I was watching a modern Miami Vice or what is it? Animal Kingdom that takes place up in Oceanside. Do you watch crime shows, or do you just really get it off the news and stuff?
I watch some of them.
Yeah.
I'm not a big watcher of crime shows, I guess. I do read the papers and the news feed on my phone and all that kind of thing, and I always earmark, the nature. I go straight to the story, that the headline about the 14-foot python that swallows the Thai woman halfway down, and she lives. She lives. Stuff like that. I love.
Right.
So.
Always going into the news, yeah.
No, and that's what I was saying earlier. Is I love the tie-in of like I mean, they're watching the coverage of this trial on the TV after the barrel's been rebuilt, and I thought that was fun because I was like, wow, local news, full circle here.
But also, I mean, the whole shark fin industry. I mean, going into that, did you go deep into that as far as like, because that's a little crazy.
No, I didn't go out and find shark fin.
I don't mean, did you do it?
I've seen it though on video.
Yeah.
It's hideous to
I
look
mean, they're
at.
all real issues. Like,
That's the point, yeah.
Yeah, I really like that. One of the real treats of being a writer and be able to write fiction for a living is to get up every day and go about your day and read your paper and look at your news and do your errands and whatever you're doing, and knowing that at any second you're in the presence of material. I love that, you know. And so when I read about these criminals, the fishermen especially, pirates, they call them in the story, and they really kind of are maritime pirates, smugglers. They'll sell and smuggle anything, but you know, shark fins among them.
Right.
You know, I'm intrigued by that. Very intrigued. Yeah.
We would love to keep talking with you, but we're out of time, sadly. Julie, Cameron, Jeff, thank you all for being with us. And like we said earlier, you can grab your copy of Desperation Reef. So I want to thank you all for joining us, and thanks to you at home for our discussion of Desperation Reef. We're going to be right back to reveal our next book date with 8 picks. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone. We want to announce our next book date with 8 pick. We are so excited to announce Eleanor of Avignon as our next pick by San Diego resident Elizabeth Delosier. The historical drama tells the story of a healer who risks her life, her freedom, and everything she holds dear to protect her beloved city from the encroaching Black Death. To keep up to date with the latest, head to cbs8.com/book club. You can also find out more on how to get a copy of our next book and when we'll be meeting with the author. Thanks for joining us.